Join our polycule. Don't kill the bunny.
Welcome to Groovy Movies. My name is Lily Austin.
And my name's James Brailsford. Hello.
Hello. And this week we are finally discussing a long-anticipated movie on this podcast. And by long, I mean in the last 2 weeks, because I erroneously mentioned that we were going to discuss it last week.
The joys of shooting, recording out of schedule.
Exactly. But we finally got to this day. And so today we are talking about a film described by Time magazine as the zeitgeist hit of the decade when it was released in the 80s. Do you know what we're talking about yet? Or do you remember it from 2 weeks ago? That's right, we're talking about Fatal Attraction.
So a film that you'd seen several times, I guess, you were pretty familiar with. Would that be fair to say?
That would be very fair to say. I'm very familiar with it. But before we get to that, we wanted to pay a little tribute to Val Kilmer, who sadly died last Tuesday at the age of 65.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody who a couple of his films we've featured in Groovy Movies. The very, very first episode we recorded, although we didn't release it first, was Heat, of course, which he has a very good supporting role in. And another one which neither of us have actually watched the film, but we watched the behind-the-scenes documentary, of course, which was The Island of Dr. Moreau that he featured in. I mean, maybe we should be mentioning some of his bigger hits or more successful films. But I mean, the one that I immediately think of, even though I've only seen the once, is Top Gun. I'd say that's the one that perhaps a lot of people might know him for. And of course, he reprised that role very briefly in Top Gun Maverick, the sequel. He appeared in that recently.
Yeah. For me, I'd actually forgotten this. I think I'd wiped it from my brain because I hated the movie. But he also starred as Jim Morrison in The Doors in 1991. And I feel like for a generation of like younger moviegoers, that is the film that he was associated with, because he really did embody Jim Morrison. It was kind of an amazing performance, that I will admit, even though other aspects of the film I did not enjoy. But yeah, for me, I will always associate with the start of this podcast, because like you said, it was the first film we discussed was Heat, and he had an amazing role in that. And I just remember us discussing how his hair was always very wiggy, despite the fact that it wasn't a wig.
It looked very, very wiggy. But yeah, you know, and he's a great supporting actor, because essentially he's a kind of a lead character energy, but he's in a supporting role in that particular film, which I think always is a good thing if you can get those actors to take those roles. But the role that I'd like to kind of mention, the role that I really think of when I see Val Kilmer as far as a film that I really enjoyed and a performance that from him that I thought was very well done, which is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which is the film credited with like turning Robert Downey Jr.'s career around. Yes, it's got an excellent charismatic lead in Robert Downey Jr., but actually Val Kilmer's almost like a second lead. He's a very strong kind of supporting actor in it, and he's incredible. You know, this is late period Val Kilmer, but like he's charismatic, he's awkward, he's cranky, just he's a perfect foil for Robert Downey Jr. in that film. And I think that's part of what makes Robert Downey Jr. so charismatic in the film. He's actually got somebody very strong who's bouncing off.
Yeah. I mean, he was kind of remembered or thought of a lot during his career as a very difficult actor to work with. Directors sometimes reported that he took himself very seriously and wasn't always like a laugh every minute. But I mean, I think his output really reflects that kind of work ethic. And yeah, maybe he was sometimes a bit difficult, but he really, like you said, like every role, even if he wasn't the lead, brought so much to it, put everything into it. The role that I didn't realize he played was he voiced Moses and God in The Prince of Egypt. I don't know if anyone's seen that, the DreamWorks animation from 1998. I loved that film as a kid. So this also just adds to my love of Val Kilmer. I really loved that he played that role. And apparently a few years later, he was asked which biblical figure he identified with the most, and he said, "Other than God." I thought, how fitting, given that he's played that role
What a great
before.
answer. Yeah, I mean, you see, we both had went to see or watched Prince of Egypt with very different, I guess, with different ages, different things. Because I watched that in 1998, very interested. Because for me, this was DreamWorks Studios had only just launched a couple of years earlier, and this was their first animated output, basically. So they'd done, I think, Peacemaker a year before, a couple of years before, their first live action. This was their first attempt at taking on Disney. So all eyes were on DreamWorks to see if they could pull it off. And I went to see it. I can't remember much about it, to be honest. I remember it was very well done, but I don't think it left much of a mark, was my takeaway. That was my experience of seeing it. From the cold, cynical movie business standpoint of, is this going to take on Disney? Does Disney need to be worried?
Well, I mean, they went on to make Shrek, so they were right to be worried. DreamWorks did a great job with that. And
I think DreamWorks, with like the Peacemaker, is very forgettable. I don't think Prince of Egypt, like their first films weren't perhaps the ones that made them, but they went on to greater things.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe the Prince of Egypt, you would probably remember clearer than me, didn't do amazingly. But that film really, like for the kids who watched it, it has endured. I see memes about it from time to time. The songs are a banger. Whenever I hear, having gone to church as a kid, any time that, the plagues of Egypt are invoked, I think about that scene in The Prince of Egypt. That film really left a mark. I thought it was a very effective telling of a biblical story. I love that this has become me fighting the corner in The Prince of Egypt.
What are we talking about again? That's right, Fatal Attraction. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Val. Okay, so anyway, we just wanted to pay tribute to Val Kilmer because he's a great actor, and 65 these days is quite young to die. So he'll be that
is a surprise. Not only a couple of decades away, not even that. Oh my! Right. Anyway, sorry, just have an existential moment there. And on with the podcast.
Okay, so very smooth segue into the main subject, as I mentioned, Fatal Attraction. And as you teed up, James, yes, I have watched this film.
Oh yes,
I would say at least 10 times, if not more.
Right, and could it, and just kind of push you on the specifics here. I get the impression this is a bit like one of my films, like maybe an Indiana Jones or a Star Wars. It's one that I watched quite a lot when I was younger, like more a young teen to mid-teens film watcher. Was that the same for you, ish?
Yes, I mean, obviously it is a film about an affair that leads to murder with some quite steamy sex scenes, I'd say. So obviously I wasn't that young when I watched it, but I think I watched it for the first time when I was 16 maybe, and just loved it. Absolutely loved it. I mean, I think I always from the get-go had some reservations about the story, how the story ends, but I think that only adds to it what makes it interesting.
Yeah, especially once you start looking into it, which, when we watched it together for my birthday a month or two ago, you were filling me in on some of the background details, which I had no idea about, to be honest. But yeah, this is the kind of film that I hadn't seen before, so it was a first time for me, but it was certainly one that even with a passing interest in films at any kind of level, you can't, at some point you will hear of and know about Fatal Attraction. So it's certainly a film that was on my radar. It just, when I was younger, it never really appealed because I didn't feel like I was interested in that kind of film. But nowadays, it was the top of my list of films I wanted to watch where we're trying to brainstorm what film it would be. What was it? Erin Brockovich was a bit too serious for a birthday weekend film, but Fatal Attraction. And honestly, that was the film I was in the mood for. Like, it was trashy, over the top, silly Hollywood, got big stars. Yeah. It didn't disappoint.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's obviously a film that has very much entered into cultural discourse because we all know the phrase bunny boiler, which comes, its derivation is this film. I think at this point I should say that there will be spoilers. We want to talk about the ending versus the original ending that wasn't released. And so be warned. But hopefully most of our listeners will have seen this film. And if not, please pause and watch it because it is a great movie. An absolute, riot.
It's a Hollywood classic.
It's a Hollywood classic. It zips along.
It's one of those things where this is the shining example of the kind of thing they used to do quite well at that time period.
Yeah, well, I'd say this is sort of the kind of ultimate example of the thriller, of the sexy thriller. What are we saying? Erotic thriller.
Erotic,
yeah. And it's also, so it's often pointed to as the one that kicked off the quote-unquote from hell genre of the 90s that kind of followed on from Fatal Attraction, because as you may know, and as we'll go into, this is a film about a man who has a one weekend stand, let's say, with a woman when his wife and daughter are away for the weekend. And then he, of course, kind of wants to ghost her. That's the end of it as far as he's concerned. But said woman will not take no for an answer. And it escalates just to kind of fatal levels, as the title suggests.
Fatal levels.
Yeah. So it's kind of about, the mistress from hell, you could say. And then what kind of followed on from that film, because it was a huge success, was we had The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, about the nanny from hell. We had The Temp, about the co-worker from hell. So many films that have kind of fit in
Misery,
this mold.
the fan from hell.
Exactly,
Don't
yeah.
Don't know if that counts, but
I think, I think it counts. That's maybe a bit of an off-piece, because with this...
It's not an erotic thriller, though, is it? It's not under the erotic thriller drama.
It's not under the erotic... And with all of these films, it's about an external woman trying to come in and break up a nuclear family. That's kind of at the crux of it. And, this kind of feeds into a lot of anxieties in the 90s about where feminism had got to, all these women going into the workforce, potentially not wanting to get married. What does that mean? And what will they do for these happy,
I see.
Married,
the nightmare
couples?
of the feminist.
Exactly, yeah. So
right.
I think that's partly what made this film, as I mentioned at the start, considered like a zeitgeist movie. Everyone was talking about it. There were loads of op-eds at the time, loads of articles written about it, and loads of people were going viewing it repeatedly at the cinema. It was like a huge hit.
Yeah, I was looking at those box office figures. God damn, they are. I think as well, this might have possibly have been the peak of profitability, where you could make films for a decent amount of money, and then you make the amount of like return on investment. Nowadays, you make a film for 300 million and you make $1 billion if you're lucky. You've only 3 or 4 times your money. But
yes.
What was this? What was it? 40 million?
Yeah. So it was made for 14 million. And 14. The box office was 14, and at the box office it made 320 million.
So, I'm no good at maths, but that's because a 10 times return would be 140 million. So this is 20 times?
Yeah, something
more
like
than
that.
20, 30 times. It's a ridiculous amount of return on your investment. So way more profitable as far as the percentage than modern films now. Wow.
Absolutely. And may I point out, it was the second highest grossing film of that year. I didn't bother to look up what the first was. Sorry, guys. But all I'm saying is there was a film that did even better than that. Well, actually, I guess if the budget had been high, maybe not. But you hear what I'm saying. Movies in this time were, of course, they were making bank. R.I.P.
Yeah, they were making the good old days. Everyone would be happy with that. No one's going to be grumbling. Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive right in. So it was written by James Durden, based on his 1980 short film Diversion. Now I mentioned that because what was interesting about this was that two producers, Stanley R. Jafe and Sherry Lansing, who I'm very interested in, we'll return to her. I believe it was Sherry actually who watched this short film and really was taken with the plot, because it's slightly different to Fatal Attraction, but it does follow the consequences of a man having a one-night stand and that woman kind of not accepting his rejection afterwards. Sherry Lansing talked about how she was really taken with this story because she really related to the single woman in the equation being rejected by men and being made to feel crazy, like you've gone crazy, by someone who, isn't even like that great. He's not like the one or something, and clearly he's a bit of a shit because he's married, but how that can happen to a person. She really thought that was something interesting and wanted and worth kind of stretching out into a movie. So they asked James Durden to write a screenplay based on his film, which
he'd written and directed. So it's interesting. So he was now possibly no longer going to be directing it, but they liked his story.
I know, yeah, but he wasn't a name, and they felt like they could kind of farm it out to a studio and to a bigger name director and make it into something.
Yeah.
So Sherry Lansing, I'm really interested in her because she was the first woman to run a major Hollywood studio, because she took over 20th Century Fox back in 1980.
Back in when? Sorry, 1980. Did you say?
1980.
Yeah, that must have been off the back of Alan Ladd Jr., who I know he was in charge during the 70s. He was the guy who commissioned and championed George Lucas and Star Wars. So I know that the 70s was his run. I don't know if there was a few people in between, but basically it won't have been long since the end of Alan Ladd's 70s period. Sherry Lansing, 1980, must have taken over very soon, if not directly after him.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is that after working there for a few years, she basically became disillusioned with the role because she really wasn't, despite having this title, she didn't really have the power she should have had. So she kind of was faced with quite a bit of misogyny, essentially, is what I understand. So at that point, after a few years, she left and kind of went out on her own. And I think Fatal Attraction was one of her first projects of her kind of as a producer, independent from this. Exactly. And so, so it was interesting because none of the studios wanted it. The big issue that they kept coming up against as far as the studio was concerned was that from the beginning, Michael Douglas was attached to the movie, who plays our lead character, Dan. And we follow Dan. We follow him as he has this affair with Glen Close. We follow him dealing with that. He is definitely the protagonist of the movie. And basically a big issue the studio had with it was they said, if this man is having an affair for no reason, he's got a beautiful, kind, lovely wife at home, there's no clear motivation for him to have an affair, that's not going to work as a story, which I find absolutely fascinating as their read. Because what really works about this film is, there is no reason for it. He just did. I mean, I actually think there are hints at what the reasons are.
Yeah, because in the film, isn't it, very early on, there's something about how his wife is a bit tired from looking after the kids, so it's like no sex. There was I can't remember the exact specifics, but there's a no sex for you tonight because, kind of raising a family has wiped me out, bar humbug for the guy, right? Oh dear. It's not his fault that he goes looking for an affair, is it? He can totally relate to that. There's at least some modicum of justification given in the narrative, isn't there? Yeah.
You know what? I don't actually remember that part at all, but I believe that would be there for sure. There's that, and there's also the fact that Beth, Dan's wife, who's played by Anne Archer, she's very keen on them buying a house in the country and leaving New York City. They have this pretty small, it's very well appointed, but they have a standard New York flat that's a bit crowded for them, and they want to move into the country to this. She has found this massive house that's a fixer-upper. So I think there is this kind of implication of some kind of castration going on. She's making him leave the hustle and bustle of the city, the kind of man about town, single life, and instead become a husband in the suburbs, less freedom, and also a big financial responsibility, right? To pay for this house and to pay for it to be done up. So I felt like perhaps there is something in him wanting to have a wild weekend to kind of still feel like that part of himself is there before he gives up and moves to the country.
I think you're totally right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But there's nothing other than those sorts of things, which to be honest, I'd suspect in real life, it's that kind of stuff that is really what makes someone have an affair. It's never anything that dramatic, right? There's never really any kind of quote unquote good reason. It's just a combination of factors and the opportunity, etc., etc. But the studio had a problem with that.
I do think that part of this film's appeal, I can imagine it's some kind of escapist fantasy for the men watching it. I can relate to Michael Douglas. I'm trapped I'm happy in my marriage. There's nothing wrong, so to speak. But maybe I won't mind an affair. But the majority of people in the audience would not do that because they honest guys in a marriage. So this is a little bit of what would it be like? And of course the message at the end is it'll be horrible, but you'll be fine at the end, because as you summarise, I remember when we watched it together, he said, the nuclear family is preserved. That's woof, we can all breathe a sigh of relief in the cinema collectively as one. The family unit, the nuclear family, it's safe, don't worry guys.
Absolutely, but I do think that the message of the film is don't have an affair. I think.
But if you do, it will be fine. It'll be bad, but it'll be fine.
You may kill someone, but it will be fine.
but that's the message I took from the movie, Lily. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But I think you're right. I think there's something as well in There was a point where you asked me, do you find Michael Douglas attractive in the film? So what was your thinking behind that question?
Well, I was just kind of watching it thinking, I was just kind of getting my own personal take on Michael Douglas, and especially how he's in this film, because I would say, as far as like attractive Michael Douglas movies, I'd say he's a bit hotter in Basic Instinct. You know, here he's definitely leaning into slightly more like just middle American guy, you know, and so I was like, is that reading for yourself as well, or is it oh Michael Douglas? Because I didn't get the impression he's been sold too much as a hot. He's been sold a bit more as a bit more of an everyman character. So I was just curious as to how that was landing, you know, outside of my own thoughts.
Well, you know what? That's exactly how I took it, which is like this is meant to be. This casting is for the male viewer, but what's interesting was then when I looked into this pre-production phase that they were going through, Michael Douglas was attached from the beginning, and that was also a problem for studios. A lot of the studios said like he's not sexy enough, he's not charismatic enough to play this part. Oh, he's not likable enough was a big thing. So actually Brian De Palma was interested in the script. He was the person who finally got some like momentum behind it after all these studios said no. But his big problem with it was that he didn't like Michael Douglas, thought he was an unsympathetic character, which I found really fascinating, because I just assumed everyone thought he was like perfect, because he is perfect in the role, and a big part of it is the fact that he's not that likable. For me, that is what adds to the film. Like, I'm from the beginning, I'm flip-flopping with my sympathies. I'm mostly in Glen Close's corner watching the movie, because he is such an arsehole to her from the moment it's clear that he doesn't want anything more to do with her. Though on the other hand, I am like, well, what did you expect, Glen Close? You did know he was married, so I'm bouncing between the two of them, but I'm definitely
Which,
not.
of course, is what makes it work. It's more
Exactly.
more interesting when you've got that, isn't it? When it's less clearly defined. Oh, he's such an angel, and this woman's the devil. It's like, you know, like if you're flip flopping between your sympathies, then the film's doing a half decent job.
Yeah, I think so. Who were you on the side of during the film?
I mean, I was more on the side of but again, it was conflicted, because, you know, we don't usually go down this road. In me and my polyamorous lifestyle these days, I'm like, oh, Michael Douglas, like, I've got no sympathy for you, lad. You know, like, you made your bed, you goddamn sit in it, you know, lay in it. But, so, yeah, but what he does play very well, and how I was reading it, is he's a bit of a dick, and he's an everyman, but he's very charismatic. He's got that move. However he's doing it, he's got that magic you can't quite put your finger on, but he makes a very watchable kind of bit of an arsehole who kind of, you know, shouldn't really be doing that, but he's got the star charisma to pull you along with it.
I completely agree. At which point I want to move on to discussing the casting of Glen Close, because similarly, I think there were some misgivings about her casting. At the point where she went for the audition, they had seen loads of people to play the part of Alex, the quote-unquote other woman, and according to Michael Douglas, who, I'm sorry, in the production story of this film, he doesn't come off that well. He said that we were doing a favor for her agent, really. Like, she didn't have a chance.
Ouch.
I know. Because up until that point, she had never played a sexy role. But she talked about how she really related to the character of Alex, just like Sherry Lansing, the producer, had said. And also she wanted this challenge because she hadn't played this kind of part before, and she knew she could do it. So she went into that studio with her hair wild like it is in the film, and just blew everyone away. She was like completely mesmerizing and really just completely sexy. And she is in the film. That's one of the great things about it, is that the way the film portrays Dan's wife, Beth, she's beautiful. And the camera definitely is attracted to her. There's no like, oh, the sad wife at home kind of vibe. It's like, he absolutely has a good thing at home. But then Glen Close has this very different kind of sexiness, this kind of wild sexiness, if you will.
I feel like I'm treading in dangerous territory, but here's my take on, like, Anne Archer. By the way, when I looked up who the actor was, I was like, oh my God, it was Anne Archer who plays his wife. And Anne Archer's like, whoa, she's like a hardcore Scientologist. So IRL, IRL, she's actually much more like Alex. Like, do I look brainwashed to you? Honestly, there's some great videos online. Sorry,
gosh.
don't come after a Scientology. It's great. Xenu, love it. Right, anyway. Sorry. But yeah, sorry. So, oh God, I went off on one there.
But watching the film, Glen and Anne, what are your thoughts?
Glen and Anne. Anne's she's essaying like the all-American wife. She's intelligent, she's smart, she's got her own thing going on. She's not like a meek and mild traditional wife. It's all, perfectly essayed. But then Glen Close is, she's like this career woman. She's a go-getter. She's an alpha female character. She's got a very different energy. Like, she's got this slightly, a more assertive view on the world that's kind of, I don't know, you can see the appeal of her as well. They're diametrically opposite, I think, but that's the point, isn't it? You can see why he's attracted to her, because she's offering something very different from his wife, like a different kind of attractive energy. That she's this, I don't know, she knows what she wants, Alex, and she does not hold back in getting it.
Yeah, which is exactly, I think, why this film really lit up the debates in the papers at the time, because she is kind of the embodiment of the fear of the single career woman. And I think there was even, at the time, Adrian Lyne, the director, gave an interview where he talked about how, I think he said something like, my career women, they're just pathetic or desperate. He said something like this. He said, my wife has never worked and she's perfectly happy. She has no motivation, no drive in life, and it makes for a really great marriage. So I think, it was fascinating reading about this, because I'll put a link to the show notes to a really amazing podcast. I think we've mentioned it before. You must remember this. They did a series called Erotic 90s, and they did a couple of episodes about Fatal Attraction. And in this podcast, they kind of explore how this film was entered the discourse and was talked about. And in this podcast, she talks about how the film is very much a Rorschach test for the audience. If you're a feminist, or if you're a career woman, or if you're a, even probably a married woman watching this film, you'll see it and you'll interpret the film very differently to the men in the audience. Apparently, men used to go and watch this film and scream, "Yeah, killer, killer" at the end.
No, because, like I say, it's almost like a fantasy for these kind of married America. It's like, yeah, get rid of the problem, and the wife takes me back, and it all goes back to normal. Whew.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, but I don't know, are we edging on to talking about the ending now?
I think let's do it. Well, the thing that is kind of a little aspect of the movie that we can watch today touches on the opera Madame Butterfly. So,
which I had no idea going into it, because everything you read about it is the thing, bunny boiler. It's it's the one night stand that doesn't go away kind of thing, and I didn't realize it had this subtext or text even of it's like essentially it's a riff on Madame Butterfly.
Exactly. So in that opera, it's about a woman, a Japanese woman who marries an American serviceman, I believe, and they get married, and then he leaves. I think he gets deployed somewhere else. In the meantime, she has a son and she's waiting for him. He unfortunately has kind of moved on and he marries someone else. And so when he comes back and discovers her with child, and she discovers him with his new wife, she takes her own life. So here we are in the spoilers, because that was the original ending of Fatal Attraction. We'll put a link to the show notes for that as well, because you can actually watch it online if you're interested, because it does make for an interesting watch to see what the film was meant to be about versus what it became.
Yeah, really. I mean, because the thing I thought when I heard about what the ending was, because I kind of knew where the ending went and the kind of twist at the end, it always seemed to be like, just seems a bit tacked on somehow. And even watching the film, I was like, because I knew, and unfortunately I knew in advance how it ended, I just thought, seems a bit, doesn't fit the rest of the film. And of course, when you realise that wasn't scripted, wasn't shot like that, that was actually a reshoot, because the audience rejected the original ending. And I watched the original ending for the first time after you sent through the YouTube video, and it makes way more sense for the characters and the story. But oh my God, to leave the audience on the very last shot is Alex kind of slitting her own throat and committing suicide. It's very powerful, but it's like, wait, you can see why the audience hated it. You can see why it's like, we don't want to leave the cinema, and that was the last shot.
Yes, yeah. So basically, okay. So we kind of zipped over the plot because.
Oh yeah.
But I think that's fine because it's worth watching. I think it builds in a really like stressful, thrillery way.
Yeah, oh yeah. It does not disappoint. If you want an erotic thriller, this is it. It's erotic, it's thrilling, it does the job. It's an excellent example of it.
So Glenn Close has talked about the fact that in the original script, there was a scene of Glenn Close going to... Sorry, let me back up. So Glenn Close's character, Alex, wants to keep the affair going, if you can even call it that, after he's said no. And so she invites him to go to watch Madame Butterfly because we've previously seen them listen to it together, have this really nice date in, and they both love this opera. Dan, of course, says no because he's really like, no, that's not a good idea. This is where it ends, kind of thing. And in the film that we can watch today, she's like crying at home, turning on and off her light with the playing Madame Butterfly, and she hasn't gone to the theatre. But apparently in the script, there is a scene of her there, and at the end, she's crying and she's like taken over with emotion. So Glenn Close felt like because we didn't get that in the film with the original ending, there wasn't as strong a connection to Madame Butterfly. So it kind of made the final ending, which evokes that ending, not that clear. Because for the viewer, if you're watching it and you don't know the story of Madame Butterfly, you won't get it. Whereas because in the original script, you see the ending of the opera, you know what she's invoking. So there's a bit more of a tie in there. So that makes sense to me as well, that original ending doesn't work in the same way because it hasn't been woven through properly. And that's the thing, because yes, in the ending that we see, the film becomes about Alex versus Beth. So Dan's wife versus the other woman, if you will, even though I need a better word for this, but for Alex, Glenn Close's character. So Alex attacks Beth in her bathroom while Dan is useless downstairs with the kettle on and he can't hear that she's going at her with a knife. So we get this like fight between these two women.
Yeah.
Dan intervenes, tries to kill Alex for like the third time, can I say? There have been various moments where he's almost killed her during the film. and yet again he fails. And so she kind of comes up from the water like a kind of a monster, like a witch, having been drowned.
It's very much like a slasher movie where the supernatural monster that's been killing everyone comes back from the dead for one last which is it just feels very out of place. It's a jump scare. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels horror movie. We move into horror movie from thriller. And it also is very much invoking the concept of like you drown a witch, and if it is a real witch, it won't sink, you know? So it's like the least unsubtle, like misogynistic kind of depiction at the end there. And it is Beth who pulls out a gun and shoots her.
Yeehaw!
We didn't know there was a gun in the house. We didn't know she was such a good shot, you know. But that's it. And in that final ending, that reshoot, like the audiences were cheering. That was what they wanted. They really felt like we want to see this woman get her comeuppance. She's tormented this family. We deserve a payoff. Whereas in the original ending, instead she kills herself and stages it so the police think that Dan is the one who killed her. Actually, in the end, Beth is able to find evidence that she did that, and so you know that she gets away with it. But yeah, like you said, we have this very impactful, like dramatic final scene watching Alex kill herself. But I do think it lacked a bit of momentum. I have to say, even though I don't like what it stands for, I prefer the ending of the remake, I have to admit.
Absolutely, even though the other one, you can see why they did it, and that makes more sense in the story. Just it's sorry to be so blunt, but it's a complete downer, and also it's just very slow. It's very slow, and whereas here you keep the momentum going. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the ending they have isn't great, but it's better than the one that they were going to go with, as far as how it works.
Yes, but in terms of kind of the feminist credentials of the film.
Oh, yeah, out the window. Just.
Yeah, it's terrible. And this is what's interesting about it was that, as I mentioned, Sherry Lansing, the producer of the film, she had really related to Alex's character. That was who she was kind of invested in, and a big part of why she wanted to make the film. And she basically had to kind of sell her feminist credentials down the river in order to make the film that the studios wanted. And apparently there was this like big fight with Glen Close because she absolutely did not want to change the ending. And she turned to Michael Douglas during this conversation and said, how would you feel if it was your character? And he basically said, like, I'm a whore, I don't care.
He said, if quoting from the notes, he said, babe, I'm a whore.
But I love, you know what, that doesn't make Michael Douglas look great, but it really does.
No.
It makes me love Glen Close even more. And also, it really speaks to the time we were in. You know, this is like a film that's touching on these real, like, tense conversations going on in American culture about the role of men and women. The 90s was this like third wave feminism moment where it was like, okay, like, what is it that we actually want? Are we getting the rights that we deserve? You know, on the one hand, things have progressed so much, but on the other hand, date rape is being questioned whether or not it's a real thing. And there is this real like anxiety amongst men, as there still is, about what the threat of women in the workplace is. So the film does really like touch on so many kind of topics of the moment.
But you need the men folk to feel like comfortable at the end, though. You see, so shoot the lady. That's it. Wicked Witch is gone. Life goes on. You can't, because it was way too much of an ambiguous, not even ambiguous, but it was a way too much of a leaning the other way, you know.
Absolutely. And I mean, and it's summed up in the very final scene where we have it's the camera zooming in or just turning towards a picture of the perfect family of Dan and Beth and their daughter. It's like, yes,
that's
the
right.
nuclear family is preserved.
We can all breathe a collective sigh of relief. Off we go, and you leave the cinema, and that was a good film. Whereas your audience would have left the cinema just going, "That was awful." You know, that ending would have it would have made the film unpalatable to a mainstream audience. It would not have been the success it was. I think if not even I think I'm damn sure with the original ending, which of course was what made Sherry Lansing want to make the film. But it's almost the classic case of.
And I think Glen Close played the part.
Right, so the thing that was the driving force essentially ends up getting sacrificed to make the film palatable, and it becomes this huge. And now it is a pop culture. It's staked its claim in the history of cinema, but that was part of the price it paid for doing that. And it is ludicrous, but it's very entertaining. You know, like I say, if you take any critiques of what it's saying about feminism and what it's saying about the character, as far as just a thriller in a film, it's a more satisfying ending.
Yeah. I mean, because that's the thing. That's what Glen Close that was her argument against reshooting it, was that this is now, you know, before she was a sympathetic character who may have been battling with some mental illness, but it also was absolutely clearly wronged. And this like took it into this whole other direction where she's a crazy monster. We should have no sympathy for her. And for me anyway, watching the film, well, I mean, yeah, I'm not one of those people who would have desperately wanted her to be killed. I don't think she did anything to deserve that. But, you know, of course, by the time she's like kidnapping their daughter towards the end of the film, my sympathy has now left her. Whereas before I was very much, I felt for her. You know, the point where the film for me is like a compelling watch from the get-go. Because there's a very sexy sex scene between Glen Close and Michael Douglas, which I want to just touch on because it's kind of like silly and deliberately like funny, as well as being, I think, genuinely sexy in a way that films just aren't anymore. And so honestly, for that weekend, I like loved seeing that weekend of them together. And you know that he's being such an arsehole, but you're also like, I'm so with Glen Close's character because we've all been there when we've had this amazing weekend with someone, and you're in this bubble of it, and it all feels great. But you know, on some level, it's not really going to work out for whatever reason. But they're doing the great boyfriend experience thing that men do so well, you know. And then
great for a date, terrible for a relationship. That used to be my motto. Anyway, sorry.
You personally?
Anyway, sorry.
Yes, but
if I had to summarize like my success or my approach to in the past, it would be more like that. Great Great for dates, just long term though. Wasn't really I wasn't very good at it.
But look at you now. All you needed was
You know.
polyamory to sort you out.
Right? But it's true.
But anyway,
it turned out. Anyway, yeah. Sorry.
No, go on. It turned out.
No, it turned out like having multiple partners was the sticking block I had to being committed. You know.
There you go. There you go. Exactly. Yeah. So we need a follow-up film where that's the solution. No murder needed. Just come on in, Alex.
Just come on. It's all fine. Join our polycule. Don't kill the bunny.
Yeah, leave the bunny out of it.
Yeah.
But the moment in the film that just really resonates with me is when she says to him, "I'm not going to be ignored, Dan." And I love that, because for most women, we've all experienced moments of being ghosted, and they make you feel like you're crazy for asking for some acknowledgement of you, even if it's just to say, "I don't want to see you anymore," you know. So I really appreciate watching a movie from 1987 where even back then a woman was saying, "No, I'm not going to do that," and that was seen as like crazy, like, "Oh my god, why doesn't she get that?" Though on the other hand, I did also think like, well, you did know from the beginning that he was married, like, let's be real. So I'm torn, and that's why I love the movie. That's why I find it compelling viewing.
You know, and I know we touched on it, but just as a filmmaker of any kind, like a director or a writer, in this case the writer, to have what you want to do is to make something that just kind of embeds itself into the consciousness. So to have, even from the film with the bunny boiler trope, the saying, like, I've known that as a phrase and what it means for decades before I even saw the film, because that's how it just hit. It somehow summed up people's fears about a certain type of relationship which could go wrong.
Yeah, and what I really think about the film is that ending aside, I think the film really did, you know, it became a talking point for all sides in this conversation about the way gender dynamics were changing at that time. So it's like a really kind of like with how In the Heat of the Night is a great movie to watch to get a sense of what was happening in 1967 in America with the civil rights movement and where culture was at with that. This film, I think, is a great, like, shows you those different attitudes that were kind of mixing. Those dynamics are all in this film, so it's very much worth watching for that. And also, it's a really good looking film. You know, Adrian Lyne, I would argue, is a somewhat problematic director. You know, he made that Lolita film that is just like, oof, questionable. But he's good at making things look pretty. You know, the white,
very stylish,
the styling, yeah, very stylish, soft lighting. It's beautiful to watch. The rain,
yeah,
nice,
yeah. No, absolutely, very, very nicely done, very nicely pulled together. Yeah.
And I was just thinking about it, reflecting on this film from the position we're at today, when, I mean, we were kind of excitedly, I think, last year talking about, like, oh, is sex back in films, are sexy thrillers back, you know, Baby Girl.
Not quite, not really.
Well, that's the thing, is that, like, I was thinking about Baby Girl in particular as, like, you know, oh, great, finally, like an erotic thriller again. But I think that film is, I mean, I really, as we discussed it in a previous episode, I really enjoyed that film. But I don't think it's actually not got that much sex in it, really.
No, there's not much sex, and also it doesn't really push the thriller element as hard. I'd say it's a more grounded version of that kind of story, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to grapple with what is it that makes it different. But you're right. It's much more like psychological, and
it's exploring the issues of power dynamics as opposed to it's an erotic thriller and it's here to thrill you, and to, you know, that's not its primary purpose. Whereas I think with Fatal Attraction, things were sacrificed to make sure that it was erotic and thrilling. You know, if it was hitting those two things, well, the ending's got to go. Whereas Baby Girl, its priorities, I think, were more the exploration of the power dynamic.
Yeah, and I don't know if that, I mean, is that just that, like, you know, porn on the internet, like, we don't need to get, like, eroticism from movies anymore. There is less of an appetite for it. But it bums me out. I want that. I want an erotic thriller. I want to see, like, people going crazy in their relationships. Like, why isn't there more of a hunger for that? Because there is from me.
Okay. I'm loving it. Oh no, this is an excellent way to end this particular episode, I think. We need more genuine erotic thrillers. Don't come here with your nuanced subtext exploration. We want more sex and we want more thrills.
Exactly. That's it. That's it. Beautifully summarised, James. Okay, so to finish up, Letterboxd rating, what would you give it?
I do 3.5.
Oh my God. I'd give it a 5.
Oh, you see, this is very much our kind of dynamic, isn't it? It's like I'm always dragging the average down. I kind of...
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But for pure watchability, the fact that I've watched this film, I realised I'd forgotten. I actually watched this movie with my fiance last summer because I wanted him to, he needed to understand an important
I
film
want you
to
to
me.
understand me, so let's watch Fatal Attraction.
Exactly. Just be prepared. That's what will happen. Once we're married, if something goes wrong, you know what's happening. Don't you dare get a bunny.
So whereas for my equivalent of that was going to see Tenet in 70mm with my anchor partner. So I was like, if you want to understand me, here you go. Tenet, 70mm.
Exactly. So I've seen it twice in this year alone, and I could honestly, I really wanted. I was very tempted to watch it again ahead of this viewing, but I thought I know it so well, it's not actually necessary. We can go for it. We can go, but yeah. So for me, I don't know. Why am I being so generous? I always thought of myself as a harsh marker, but yeah, for me, it's perfect. It's a perfect movie. I love it. I love Glen Close. Love her hair. Full marks.
I mean, for me, enjoyed it, solid, but it's a 3.5. It just doesn't quite satisfy the other criteria I've got for kind of getting you into that 4 or 5 mark, and that 5 for me. I'm looking forward to the conversation where I award a film a 5 and you give it not a 5, and then we could.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can address that in our next series, I think. All right, well. On that note, thank you guys for listening to another episode of Groovy Movies.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate the support. And if you can leave us a like or a review, it all helps get the podcast out to the widest possible audience.
So we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.